The person that was called upon to care for the child in turn turned out to be the person that they couldn't trust.
It really breaks my heart.
I never took him like that. And why her?
She's such a sweet little girl.
The charges are horrific. A 6-year-old allegedly...
This video discusses graphic child abuse. Viewer discretion advised. It's cold and wet, and it smells real bad where 6-year-old Sigourney is. She'd watched the sunset here, laying very still and hoping. How long had she been here? She really wasn't sure. But something she was sure of was that she couldn't move her bare legs or touch most of her tiny dress because she can't really move her hands or her arms. This wasn't the first time Daddy had mostly buried her in the backyard, but it was getting really chilly in rural Waynesburg, Pennsylvania in the fall, and she couldn't remember him leaving her here this long. Was he coming back? All she could do is wish he'd come back so she could tell him just how sorry she was that she lied to him. Lying was really important to her daddy, and she knew she'd done wrong, but she sure was sorry. If only Daddy would come back, she could tell him. Only she knows how long it took before she gave up, stopped crying out for help, or if she even tried. But as the hours dragged on, this little girl was in a muddy, stinky hole in the ground throughout the night. In the morning, her dad, John Kraft, 50 years old, walked into his backyard to retrieve her. Sigourney reeked like sewage, which undoubtedly pissed him off further. Her mother, Frankie Kraft, 45, gave her 4 baths that day to remove the sewage smell. It just wouldn't come off. But I do imagine both her and her mother were thankful that Sigourney had survived the night. Though maybe one is more happy than the other, but it's hard to say as it was Sigourney who was being punished. Why was she so bad? Why couldn't she just make Daddy happy? And while it's hard to remember what it's like to be such a small child, adults living with CPTSD know that these are the kind of toxic shame memories that easily lead to suicidal ideation later on. But this was just another day, like so many at the Kraft house in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, since Sigourney was born in 2016. And sadly, it wasn't only the Krafts who were aware of this abuse.
I knew that there was trouble in the home, but I didn't know it was that bad.
Larissa Fauner, a brunette woman appearing to be in her mid-30s, the wife of the Kraft's landlord and their neighbor, had always liked the kids. They were close in age to her own children, and for most people it's really hard to hate kids, especially ones who are so graceful in such a rough situation.
They're great kids. Their favorite thing to do with me and my kids was we would go riding on the four-wheeler and stuff like that. Every month I would take them down food, clothes anytime my kids. Sometimes I'd go buy them brand new clothes. Toys for Christmas.
In the small bit of time she'd spent with them, she'd been concerned about several things. First, the house had little food in it. Second,
the kids were always dirty, especially the little girl. She would always have knots in her hair. There's countless times that I've had to cut them out because I couldn't get them out.
Third, she could sometimes hear Sigourney's dad, John Kraft, screaming at the kids and beating them.
I could hear him hitting them and the kids screaming.
When she questioned the father, he said one of his children was choking on a Lego.
One specific incident was I saw cigarette burns on the kids. I could hear them inside, and I could hear John yelling at the kids and the kids crying and what sounded like him hitting them.
Larissa had reported the family to Children Youth Services, CYS, the Pennsylvania state agency in charge of protecting children from abuse and exploitation a few times, having first noticed the abuse about a year earlier.
I feel like a lot of people failed them, and that even maybe myself, I feel like I could have done more. But when I saw something, I said something, and it was out of my hands at that point.
State police say those reports came to light when CYS contacted them after social workers saw severe bruises on Kraft's 6-year-old daughter.
CYS would visit and talk with the family, but saw nothing, found nothing, and did nothing for these poor kids.
I reached out to CYS for comment to see if they had received any reports of abuse in the past. They got back to me and said that they cannot comment on any ongoing investigation. Now, I also asked the district attorney here, and he said this case still remains under investigation.
Things simmered down for a bit, as they often do in abusive households, and things were normal again. Or at least not extreme like burying your daughter in the backyard for lying. But normal for the Krafts included John beating his 6-year-old girl with his hands, his belt, or his arm that had a surgically implanted metal rod. And for whatever reason, the other children were mostly spared of this treatment. Sigourney took the brunt of it. But as time passes, the anger again wells up in John. On the week of September 18th, something Sigourney did or didn't do set John off. It was likely relatively minor, as what can a 6-year-old really do that induces a murderous rage? If we're being honest with ourselves, with rare exceptions, there's basically nothing a child that small can do that would justify an adult killing them, or even trying to. But on that day in September, John grabs little Sigourney by the neck and flings her to the wall, choking her neck as his fingers scrape the drywall behind her tiny body. Towering over her and screaming threats about God knows what, he slides her down the wall a bit and throws her onto the ground, causing her nose to bleed. While wrapping his hands around her neck and slamming her on the ground several times, her eyes begin rolling back in her head, and only the whites of her eyes can be seen as she passes out. After witnessing this attack, Frankie screams, "Stop! Somebody's going to get hurt! You can't do this!" But somebody had already been hurt. Sigourney lies on the ground unconscious with a bloody nose. He choked her out while she lay there, knowing her daddy didn't really care if she lived or died. And maybe she didn't either. Thankfully, though, she woke up. Alive, but with even more bruises added to her tiny body and awful memories added to her tiny mind. At school that week, someone notices bruises on Sigourney, and CYS comes out to do an interview with the girl at the school. She explained the hell she'd been living to the social workers the best she could, but being 6, all she could really report was things like, "Daddy hurt me," and a bit about how he did it. She tells them about her punishments, even for lying, that she would be left buried in the yard until she told the truth, and often well past the point that she was ready to be honest. It's not like most 6-year-olds are hard to catch in a lie. They lack a poker face and often use faulty logic. The social workers from CYS noticed that bruises are visible on a significant area of her body, particularly her head, torso, and buttocks. And they vary in color from yellow-brown to black and blue. But several are a green-yellow color in the middle. All of this indicates that this wasn't a one-time incident. Not that that would have made things any better. But from the evidence, it's clear that this girl is beaten rather regularly, as she's been beaten and choked at least 3 times in the past few weeks, and one can easily assume 3 times in a month means serial abuse. An interview with her older brother corroborates her stories and also fills in the gaps. John had left Sigourney buried in the yard overnight at least once. But the brother tells them that his dad has buried her in the yard several times for just a few hours. A few days later, on September 21st, CYS investigators go to the trailer for a house visit. While there, Frankie Kraft does the right thing for the first time in a long time and takes 2 of the CYS caseworkers aside. Frankie whispers to them, "Please help her. She's not safe," clearly telling them her daughter was in danger. They could see that she was shaking with fear, but needed to get something off of her chest. She was also whispering to prevent John from hearing them talk. She reiterates to them, "You have to get her out of here. She's not safe with him." CYS reports this to the Pennsylvania State Police, who come out and do their own investigation of the allegations in mid-October. State Trooper Matthew Rakinski, the lead investigator, said that after hearing of the girl being repeatedly buried alive, he and his deputies scoured the yard for a grave or burial hole. Rather easily, they find a freshly dug but sewage-filled hole about 2 feet by 18 inches with some clumps of mud trying to cover it over, but it's still pretty clear what it is. A tiny grave. Rakinski says of the hole, "The girl would have smelled like sewage. That entire area smells like sewage." The Pennsylvania State Police arrest John on October 21st for single charges of false imprisonment and unlawful restraint of a minor, and multiple accounts of aggravated assault, simple assault, endangering the welfare of a child, and recklessly endangering another person.
Kraft is currently in custody at the Greene County Prison.
John's bail is set at $125,000, which at first he is unable to post, so he stays in jail for a week or so before being able to be released on bail. Meanwhile, CYS and the state police continue their investigation. During this process, Frankie eventually admits to CYS case manager Jessica Welsh that John threw the girl against the floor and wall while also choking her, which is how she got the bruises on her face and jaw. She also explains that eventually, after the girl was unconscious and bleeding, she stopped her husband from finishing what to an outsider might look more like an attempted murder than child abuse. The children are removed from the home and mother and placed in foster care. Greene County District Attorney David Rousseau told Newsweek, "I would like to commend the Pennsylvania State Police on their swift and diligent efforts in their investigation and bringing this case to my immediate attention." And the district attorney had some strong words to say about this case, which you could tell he was taking personally.
The district attorney calling it one of the worst child abuse cases he's seen.
We will not tolerate it in our county, and this individual will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Our children deserve better than this. This is a barbaric situation, and my office will not tolerate child abuse in this county. The allegations are that this child was beaten brutally, that the child had bruises all over her body, that she was choked and to the point that she had passed out. She was buried in a hole as punishment. She was thrown in a hole overnight. Her head was slammed off the wall and slammed off the floor.
I will do everything in my power to protect the children of our community. No child deserves to be treated this way, and my office will concentrate our efforts in bringing justice for this child. My office has always taken a strong stance on crimes against children. And while some neighbors like Larissa Fauner knew of the abuse, others like James Fauner, who we would have to assume is her husband or relative, at least feigned some kind of ignorance.
I was shocked. Because I don't know. I never took him like that. You never think that. And why her?
On December 14th, Frankie Kraft is charged with child endangerment and multiple counts of conspiracy in connection to the abuse of Sigourney. She waives her right to a preliminary hearing, but stays for her husband John's hearing. And John's attorney fights hard for his client. John Headley, his attorney, tries to call Frankie Kraft to the stand, but her attorney objects to this, stating that his client has a Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate herself. Headley then argues that because the children weren't called to the stand, there is no direct testimony about the abuse, stating, "The bulk of the Commonwealth's case rests on hearsay and double hearsay." Greene County District Attorney David Rousseau responds to this by reiterating that this is one of the worst cases of child abuse that's happened in this county. But what do you think? Are the charges enough? Should John Kraft also be charged with attempted murder? Should he have been let out on bail? If you or anyone may be the victim of child abuse, please contact the Child Help National Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD, which is 1-800-422-4453, or contact their live chat services at childhelphotline.org. I invite you to subscribe and click the bell so you're notified when I drop a new video, or like the video so YouTube realizes you like this kind of content and recommends it to you a little bit more regularly. Now, if you're in the mood for another dark case like this, I recommend this video about a woman who dies and leaves her adult son to discover what's in a mysterious box that's been in the freezer his whole life. But I hope to see you again real soon, because there's always something sordid happening beneath the floorboards, somewhere.